A parent's worst nightmare is to lose a child and never know what happened. For 3 years, that was the reality for two families after a pair of twin girls vanished in the woods near Birch Hollow. The search yielded nothing. The case went cold. Life moved on, but the questions never stopped. Then, 61-year-old Maurice Garnett finds a small jacket, snagged on a tangle of ivy near an old cabin deep in the forest. She recognizes it. Maurice has lived alone in these mountains for 30 years, trying to outrun a loss of her own. Now, she's stumbled upon a mystery she never wanted to find. Something has been hidden out here all this time. What happened to those girls? Before we continue, let us know where you're listening from. And if this story moves you, be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I have something very special in store. Maurice Garnett woke before the dawn, as she had for 3 decades. No alarm clock, no schedule other than the one the mountain demanded. The cabin was cold, and her joints reminded her that 61 years had a weight of their own, especially when they were spent hauling water and chopping wood. She dressed in layers, long underwear, flannel, a wool sweater her mother had knit 40 years ago, now patched at the elbows. Her hands moved through the morning ritual without thought. Kindling, newspaper, a careful arrangement in the wood stove. The strike of a match, and soon, warmth began to fill the single room that had been her entire world since 1995. She put water on to boil for coffee, real coffee, the one luxury she allowed herself, and gazed out the window at the ridge just beginning to define itself against the lightening sky. Snow still capped the highest peaks, though it was late April. The forest surrounding her cabin stretched for miles in every direction, a dense tapestry of pine, Douglas fir, and western cedar, threaded with cold, clear streams. She knew every trail, every game path, every place where the undergrowth grew too thick to pass. A hand-drawn map was tacked to the wall, its edges curled with age, marked with her own annotations. Good spots for mushrooms, where the deer bedded down, which springs ran year-round, the locations of abandoned cabins and old logging roads. The map was her Bible. She'd created it over years of hiking, adding details as she learned the rhythms and secrets of the land. Every mark meant something. A fallen tree that served as a good landmark, a rock outcropping from which you could see 20 miles on a clear day, a meadow where wildflowers bloomed so thick in summer you could smell them 100 yards away. Maurice poured her coffee and sat at the small table, its surface scarred by decades of use. She didn't dwell on the past much anymore. Thinking didn't change anything. But the mornings had a way of bringing things back. The silence, the solitude, the particular quality of the light before the sun broke through the trees. The mornings reminded her of Tommy. Her son would have been 41 now. Would have been. Those 3 words held everything. An entire life that never happened. Grandchildren she'd never meet. Conversations that ended when he was just 8 years old. Tommy had drowned in a river while she stood 20 feet away, distracted for just a moment. Long enough. The search and rescue teams found his body 3 days later, caught in a snag of branches downstream. They were kind, those searchers, but their kindness couldn't fill the hole that had opened in her chest that day and never closed. Her husband couldn't forgive her. She couldn't forgive herself. The marriage was over in less than a year, and she'd drifted for a while, working odd jobs, moving from town to town, realizing she couldn't bear to be around people anymore. Their sympathy was worse than judgment. She saved enough money, bought this land, 40 acres of nothing but trees and silence, and built the cabin with her own 2 hands. It took 2 years and nearly broke her, but she needed something that would break her. She needed labor so hard, it left no room for thought. The town of Birch Hollow was 8 miles away by the old logging road, though Maurice rarely used that route. She preferred the trails, even if they added to the distance. The town was small, maybe 300 people, mostly logging families who had been there for generations. She went in once a month, sometimes less, for supplies she couldn't make herself: coffee, salt, flour, kerosene for the lamps, ammunition for the rifle that provided the occasional deer, which gave her meat for months. Ben Halford ran the general store and was the closest thing she had to a friend. He was 74 now, moved slower than he used to, but his mind was sharp and his discretion absolute. He never asked questions, never pried. When she came in, he would gather her supplies, add them to her tab, and they would talk about the weather or the wildlife. Nothing personal. Maybe twice a year, she would join him for coffee at the counter, and they would share the comfortable silence of two people who understood that some stories didn't need to be told. It was Ben who'd told her about the missing girls 3 years ago. She'd come in for supplies, and the whole town was consumed by it. Search and rescue everywhere. Helicopters overhead, volunteers combing the woods. Maurice kept to herself, watching from a distance. She'd seen the news reports. Susan Kovach, devastated, pleading for information. The father, Raymond, stood beside her, looking hollowed out. The girls were twins, 12 years old, Lily and Emma. They had been camping with their father about 5 miles from where Maurice lived, a popular spot near Blackwater Creek, where families went because the sites were well maintained and rangers made regular patrols. The story was that Raymond had gone to move the car closer to the campsite. It was raining, and he wanted to pack up early. He'd left the girls in the tent for maybe 30 minutes. When he came back, they were gone. No sign of a struggle. No note. No trail. It was as if they had simply vanished. The search lasted for weeks, then months, then quietly faded away. No bodies were ever found. No evidence of foul play. No ransom demands. The official conclusion was that they had wandered off and succumbed to exposure, lost in the vast wilderness. Animals might have scattered the remains. Maurice had felt for the family, especially the mother, but she had kept her distance. She couldn't help them. Most days, she couldn't even help herself. She'd learned that the only way to survive her own loss was not to get tangled up in the loss of others. It was a hard truth, but it was hers. Yesterday, that had changed. She was checking her snares. She had a line of them set for rabbit and the occasional grouse, and she'd decided to swing by the old McCready cabin. Jasper McCready had been a trapper back in the 40s and 50s, and his cabin had been abandoned since the 70s. It sat in a clearing, surrounded by dense brush and second-growth trees, well off any maintained trail. Maurice liked to check on the cabin maybe twice a year, just to see if anyone was using it. Sometimes transients found these old places, and while she didn't care what people did, she liked to know who was passing through her territory. The cabin was falling apart. The roof had caved in on one side, the windows were long gone, and the door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Wild blackberry vines had taken over the place, crawling up the walls and covering everything in their thorny limbs. She was walking the perimeter when her eye caught something that didn't belong. A splash of color. Something blue, snagged in the ivy that wrapped around a fallen beam. She tugged it free gently, her heart already knowing before her mind did. A child's jacket, sized for maybe a 10 or 12-year-old, faded denim with a pink butterfly patch on the sleeve. The fabric was weathered, but not completely rotted. It had been here a while, but not for decades. She turned it over in her hands and found the tag inside the collar, handwritten in permanent marker. E.K. Emma Kovach. Maurice stood there for a long time, holding that jacket, feeling the weight of it. This was 5 miles from where the girls had disappeared, deep in the woods where the searchers had probably looked, but could have easily missed it in the dense growth. This meant something. This changed everything. She took the jacket home, laid it on her table and stared at it until it was dark. She barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities. If the jacket was here, either the girls had made it here on their own, unlikely for two 12-year-olds with no wilderness experience, or someone had brought them here. And if someone had brought them here, that meant abduction. It meant they might have been alive, at least for a time. It meant the official story was wrong. Maurice finished her coffee and looked at the jacket again in the morning light. She knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to take it to the sheriff, turn it in, and let them handle it. But she also remembered how the authorities had handled Tommy's case. The condescension, the assumption that she had been negligent, the way they looked at her as if she had killed her own son through carelessness. She had cooperated fully, answered every question, and it had been one of the worst experiences of her life. Worse, even, than the grief because it added shame to the unbearable weight of loss. She didn't trust them. But more than that, something inside her chest had cracked open when she found that jacket. A long-sealed door had creaked open, and light was starting to get in. Or maybe the darkness was getting out. She couldn't tell which, but she knew she couldn't just walk away. Those girls had parents, people who loved them and had spent 3 years in the private hell of not knowing. If there was any chance, any possibility of finding out what happened, she had to try. Just for a day or two, she told herself, just to see if there was anything else. Then she would decide what to do next. Maurice pulled on her heavy leather boots. She double-checked her gear, packing the jacket in a plastic bag. Her day pack held water and jerky, binoculars, a knife, matches, and a roll of bright orange surveyor's tape for marking a trail. She checked her rifle, then decided against it, too heavy for what she was doing, and took her fixed blade knife instead. The morning had broken clear and crisp, perfect for moving through the terrain. She locked the cabin, which was unnecessary but a habit, and headed back toward the McCready place. The walk took 40 minutes at her steady pace, and she used the time to think through what she knew. The jacket was proof. But of what, exactly? That the girls had been there? Or at least one of them had. The state of the fabric suggested months, maybe a year or two. But she was no expert. Had they been alive? Had they left willingly or been taken? The old cabin looked different in the daylight. Less menacing, just sad and forgotten. She approached it slowly, studying the ground. The spring mud held tracks well, but she saw nothing recent. Just the prints of deer and what might have been a coyote. She started a systematic search, working in a spiraling pattern out from where she'd found the jacket, looking for anything out of the ordinary. That's when she saw it. About 20 feet from the cabin, partially hidden under a moss-covered rock, was a single folded piece of paper. It was thick and water-damaged, but it had been protected enough to still be legible. Maurice picked it up carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was a child's, the letters careful and round. She held her breath as she read the date at the top. July 29th, 2 weeks. After the girls disappeared. The message was short, just a few lines. We are still here. He said we have to be quiet. Emma cries at night, but I tell her it's okay. He brings food. He says we are safe now. Says someone was trying to hurt us. I don't understand. I just want to go home. Maurice read it 3 times, her hands trembling. 2 weeks after. They were alive 2 weeks after everyone thought they were dead. Being held here by someone. Someone who told them they were in danger, who brought them food, who kept them hidden while the entire town was looking for them. She looked around the clearing with new eyes. Someone had done this. Someone had taken these children and kept them here. The question was whether they were protecting them or harming them, and if those two things could, somehow, be the same. Maurice sat on a fallen log, the diary page still in her hand. Her mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. The official search had lasted 6 weeks, with the most intense effort in the first 2. On July 29th, when this note was written, the search had already been scaled back significantly. Most of the volunteers had gone home. The prevailing theory had always been that the girls had perished within the first day or 2, that their bodies lay somewhere in the vast wilderness, perhaps carried off by animals or hidden in some crevice or ravine. But this page proved otherwise, at least for one of them. The entry was unsigned, but the reference to Emma crying suggested it was Lily who had written it. She had been alive, and lucid enough to keep a journal. And most disturbing of all, they had been with someone. Someone who brought them food. Someone who told them they were being protected from some unnamed threat. Maris stared at the page again, studying every detail. It was common-lined paper, the kind children use in school. The ink was blue ballpoint, slightly blurred where water had touched it, but still legible. The handwriting betrayed the stress of its author. Some letters pressed harder than others, the lines not quite straight. This was a child writing in fear, trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. She carefully folded the page and slipped it into her pocket, then resumed her search with a renewed urgency. If there was one page, there could be more. She worked methodically, checking under rocks, in the crevices of the cabin's fallen walls, anywhere something small might have been tucked away or blown by the wind. An hour passed with nothing, then another. The sun climbed higher, warming the air, and Maris shed her outer layer. She was about to expand her search radius when, near a cluster of young alders, something caught her eye. A thin piece of cord strung between 2 saplings, about knee-high. At first, it looked like part of a snare, but as she examined it more closely, she realized it had been deliberately placed across what looked like a faint game trail. It wasn't a tripwire meant to catch something, but rather a marker. Maris followed the trail, moving slowly, paying attention to her footing. The path was narrow, almost invisible, the kind born from regular use, not deliberate clearing. Someone had walked this path many times, enough to wear down the undergrowth, but not enough to make it obvious. The trail led away from the McCready cabin, heading northeast through a dense stand of timber. After about 200 yards, it opened into a small clearing she'd never noticed before, sheltered by a ring of ancient cedars. In the center of the clearing, almost invisible until you were right on top of it, was a makeshift shelter, its branches woven together and covered with bark and moss, built low to the ground. Maris approached with caution. The shelter was empty, but it had clearly been used. Inside she found evidence of habitation. A fire pit made of river stones, carefully constructed to minimize smoke. A crude bed frame of branches with a depression in the earth, where someone had slept. And, most telling, a series of carved wooden stakes driven into the ground in a line, like tally marks or a calendar. She counted them. 43 stakes. 43 days. Someone had stayed here for at least 43 days, marking the time. The shelter showed skill. Whoever had built it knew how to live in the woods, how to stay hidden, how to survive. This wasn't the work of an amateur. It was someone who understood the wilderness on a profound level. Near the fire pit, she found something else. A small animal snare, well made and functional. The wire was relatively new, maybe a few years old at most. Beside it lay the picked clean bones of what looked like a rabbit. Someone had been hunting for food here, cooking it, and surviving. Had the girls been here? Had they been kept in this shelter while the entire town searched for them? The thought made her stomach turn. Two 12-year-old girls, terrified and confused, held in the woods by someone who either thought he was protecting them or told them he was. Maris sat back on her heels, the timeline beginning to form in her mind. The girls disappeared on July 15th. 2 weeks later, one of them wrote that diary entry in the McCready cabin. The 43 stakes suggested someone stayed in this shelter for at least 6 weeks. They had been moved between locations. The person holding them was worried about searchers getting too close. She scanned the clearing more carefully, looking for anything else that might tell the story. At the base of one of the cedars, she found initials carved into the bark. VK. The carving was old enough that the bark had begun to heal around it, but not so old that it had faded completely. Maybe 3 or 4 years. VK. The girl's last name was Kovach. Could it be a relative? Their father's name was Raymond. Maris tried to remember if other family members had been mentioned, but her memory was a blur. At the time, she'd only half listened to the town gossip, trying not to get involved. She needed to know more about the family, about who could have done this, but she was reluctant to ask too many questions in town. People would want to know why she was interested, and she wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. Not until she understood more of what she'd found. Maris took out her surveyor's tape and marked the trail leading to the clearing, tying small, eye-level pieces to branches every 20 yards or so. She would need to find this place again. While she could navigate this forest better than most, it was easy to get turned around in dense woods where every tree looked the same. She spent another hour searching the area, but found nothing else of significance. The shelter had been abandoned for some time. Moss was growing on the bark roof, and leaves had drifted inside. Whoever had been here was long gone. As she prepared to leave, a thought struck her. If someone had kept the girls here for over a month, they would have needed supplies. Food beyond what could be foraged. Water containers, blankets, basic items. You couldn't keep 2 children alive in the woods for 6 weeks with nothing. Which meant someone had been going back and forth to civilization, buying supplies and bringing them here. Someone from Birch Hollow. The realization hit her like a splash of cold water. This wasn't some transient stranger. It was a local. Someone who knew this forest, who could move between the town and the wilderness without drawing attention. Someone who might still be there, living among the very people who had searched for those girls, carrying the secret of what they had done. Maris looked at the clearing one last time, committing every detail to memory. Then she started for home, walking quickly now, her mind processing what she knew and what she needed to find out. The girls had been taken. They had been kept alive, at least for a time, by someone who knew how to survive in the wild. This person had moved them from one place to another, staying ahead of the searchers. The diary note suggested he had told them they were in danger, that he was protecting them. But protecting them from what? Or from whom? And the biggest question, the one that made her chest tighten and her hands tremble, was where were Lily and Emma Kovach now? By the time Maris reached her cabin, the sun was past its zenith. She was tired, hungry, and shaken by her discoveries. She made a simple meal, bread and cheese, an apple from her winter stores that was beginning to soften but was still good, and sat at her table with the diary page laid out before her. She had spent 30 years trying to escape the pain of losing a child. She had built walls, physical and emotional, to keep the world at a distance. She had convinced herself that isolation was survival, that to care about anything beyond her immediate needs would destroy her. But those walls were crumbling now. She could feel them giving way. Because somewhere in all of this was a truth that needed to be found, and two girls who deserved more than to be forgotten. She thought of Susan Kovach, their mother, living for 3 years with no answers. She thought of her own son, Tommy, and how she would give anything, anything, to have him back, to have even the possibility of finding him alive. She couldn't give Susan her daughters back. She didn't even know if they were alive. But she could find out what happened. She could give her and herself at least that much. The truth, whatever it was, however terrible it might be. Maris took out a notebook and began to write down everything she knew, creating a timeline, listing the questions that needed answers. Tomorrow, she would go into town. She would talk to Ben, carefully, and begin gathering information on the Kovach family. She would find out who VK was and why their initials were carved on a tree near a shelter where someone had hidden 2 missing children. The jacket lay on the table beside her notes, a small, southern hemisphere reminder that some stories don't end when you stop looking. They just wait, silent and patient, for someone to find them again. Maris woke early again, her body stiff from the previous day's hike. She was in good shape for her age, but hours of searching over rough terrain had taken their toll. She stretched carefully, made her coffee, and reviewed the notes she'd written the night before. The questions far outweighed the answers, but at least now she had a framework. She decided to spend one more day searching before heading into town. If she was going to ask questions about the Kovach family, she needed to know as much as she could first. Information flowed more freely when you already understood the context, when you could ask the right questions instead of fumbling in the dark. This time she brought more supplies, extra water, food for the day, and her camera to document anything she found. The morning was overcast, threatening rain, but Maris had spent enough time in this forest that the weather didn't much concern her. You got wet, you got dry. That's how it worked. She returned to the clearing with the shelter, using her surveyor's tape to find her way. In the flat, gray light of day, with time to truly examine the space, she noticed details she had missed before. The shelter had been carefully positioned to be invisible from above. Helicopter searches would have passed right over it. The fire pit was designed to disperse smoke, and the clearing itself was just small enough that it wouldn't appear as a break in the canopy. Whoever built this knew about search and rescue techniques. They knew how helicopters worked, how thermal imaging could be used, how ground teams moved through terrain. This was not a lucky hiding spot. It was a deliberate, informed one. Maris began searching in wider circles around the clearing, looking for any trails that led away. She found three distinct paths, each heading in a different direction. One led back toward the cabin, she deduced. The second led toward a small creek she knew was a reliable water source. The third went deeper into the wilderness, away from any maintained trails or known landmarks. She followed the creek trail first, moving slowly and watching for anything unusual. After a 10-minute walk, she found another snare. This one was set along what looked like a rabbit run. The snare was old, the wire rusted, and the trigger mechanism was stuck. But the craftsmanship was evident. Whoever set it understood animal behavior and knew how to build an effective trap with minimal materials. The snare reminded her of one she'd seen in old books on wilderness survival, the kind of knowledge that wasn't common anymore. Most people bought their traps at a store or didn't hunt at all. This was a traditional skill, passed down or learned from someone who truly knew the old ways. She continued along the creek and found a spot where the bank had been carefully dug out to create a small pool for collecting water. Rocks had been arranged to filter out sediment, and there were impressions in the mud that could have been made by containers, jars, or buckets, set down repeatedly in the same spots. Again, it showed foresight and planning. Someone had been living here with a degree of comfort and sustainability. Maris took pictures of everything with her old film camera. She didn't trust digital devices. They felt too fragile, too dependent on batteries and electronics that could fail. Film was simple, reliable. She would have to get the roll developed in town. But that was a problem for later. She followed the third trail, the one that headed deeper into the forest. This path was less distinct than the others, either used less often or more carefully concealed. It wound through a dense thicket, crossed a rocky slope where it was nearly impossible to follow, then picked up again on the other side in a stand of old-growth hemlock. The trees here were massive, with trunks over a meter in diameter, and canopies so thick that little light reached the forest floor. It was a dark and silent place, the kind that felt ancient and watchful. Maris moved carefully, aware of how easy it would be to get lost in terrain like this. After nearly an hour of difficult walking, she found herself at the edge of a steep ravine. Water was running somewhere below, out of sight. The trail seemed to end here, or rather, it descended down a steep, treacherous slope that would require both hands and no small amount of courage. She studied the hillside, looking for signs that someone had gone down. At first, she saw nothing, but then a pattern emerged. Small saplings, gripped again and again, their bark worn smooth in hand-sized patches. Someone had used them as handholds, climbing up and down this steep embankment so many times they'd left their mark. Maris considered following the trail, but thought better of it. The descent looked treacherous, and she was alone. If she fell, if she was injured here, no one would find her for days, perhaps weeks. She had to be smart about this. Instead, she moved carefully along the ravine's edge, searching for an easier way down, for any clue as to what lay at the bottom. After 20 minutes or so, she found a place where the ravine wall had partially collapsed, creating a rugged but navigable path to the floor. She took it slow, testing each foothold before trusting it with her weight. Loose scree shifted under her boots, and twice she had to pause and reroute. But she finally reached the bottom, breathless but unharmed. The ravine floor was narrow, perhaps 15 feet across, with a stream running fast and cold down its center. The walls rose steeply on both sides, and the light was dim despite it being midday. She saw why someone would choose this place. It was naturally concealed, sheltered from the elements, and the sound of the stream would mask any noise. She began a methodical search. 50 yards downstream, she found what she was looking for. Another campsite, this one more permanent looking than the lean-to. Someone had built a shelter against the ravine wall, using fallen logs and branches to create a structure that would ward off the rain and offer genuine protection. A fire pit sat before it, larger and more established, its stones blackened from repeated use. But it was the debris scattered around the site that caught her eye. Discarded food cans, plastic water bottles, a torn tarp, and most telling of all, a child's shoe. Just one. Small and caked with mud, its laces still tied. Maris picked it up, her heart clenching. It was a girl's sneaker, purple with pink accents, a size that would fit a 12-year-old. She searched the area more thoroughly and found other items. A hairbrush tangled with long blonde hair, a scrap of torn cloth that might have been from a shirt, and, under a pile of pine needles, half hidden and easy to miss, another carved wooden stake. Someone had lived here with the girls. This is where they had been brought after the initial shelter was abandoned, moved deeper into the woods as the search intensified. How long had they been here? The debris suggested weeks, at least. Maybe longer. Maris sat on a log, the shoe still in her hand, and tried to imagine it. Two girls, taken from their campsite, told they were in danger, held in the woods by someone claiming to protect them. Had they believed him? Had they tried to run? The diary entry had mentioned tears, confusion, a desperate wish to go home. She thought of the fear they must have felt, the bewilderment. At 12, you're old enough to understand danger, but not to fully process the betrayal of an adult. You want to believe that grown-ups know what they're doing, that there's some reason for the nightmare you're living. The shoe felt impossibly light in her hands. She set it down gently, as if it were fragile, as if it might break. Then she continued her search, documenting everything she found, building a more complete picture of what had happened in these woods 3 years ago. By the time she climbed out of the ravine, the afternoon was fading, and her energy was spent. She had found more questions than answers, but the questions were becoming more specific, more focused. Now she knew the girls had been moved between at least 3 locations: the McCready cabin, the sheltered clearing, and this ravine camp. She knew their captor had wilderness skills and knowledge of search techniques. She knew he had kept them alive for weeks at least. And she knew from the abandoned camps and scattered belongings that something had changed. Something had brought an end to the careful concealment, the sustainable camping. Either the girls had been moved again, somewhere she hadn't found yet, or something worse had happened. Maris started for home as the first drops of rain began to fall. Tomorrow, she would go into town and talk to Ben. She needed names, history, connections. She needed to know who VK was, and if that person was still in Birch Hollow, walking free while 2 families lived with unanswered questions. The drive to Birch Hollow took 30 minutes on the old Forest Service road, Maris's truck rattling over ruts and potholes. She didn't come to town often enough to justify maintaining the road herself, and the county certainly wasn't going to. The truck was a 1987 Ford, older than some people's children, but it ran true, and she could fix most problems on her own with basic tools and patience. The town looked the same as it always had: a single main street with a general store, a diner, a post-off office that doubled as a bus stop, and a few houses scattered around the center. The old sawmill sat silent on the edge of town, shuttered 10 years ago when the last of the big timber companies pulled out. Most of the young people had left after that, following the work to bigger cities. The ones who stayed were old-timers like Ben, people who would rather scrape by than leave the only place they'd ever known. Maris parked in front of the general store and sat for a moment, collecting herself. She didn't enjoy being around people anymore, not even the ones she trusted. It took effort to make conversation, to seem normal, to not let the years of solitude show too plainly in her manner. But this was necessary, so she did it. Ben was behind the counter when she walked in, reading a newspaper through glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He looked up, a genuine pleasure spreading across his weathered face. Maris. Twice in 1 month. Should I be worried? Maybe you should be flattered, she said, managing a small smile in return. I'll take what I can get. Coffee's on. He poured a cup from the pot he kept warm all day, handed her the mug, and waited. Ben understood silence. He knew when to let it stretch and when to fill it. Maris appreciated that about him more than she could say. She took a sip of the coffee. It wasn't as good as what she brewed at home, but it was hot and strong. She tried to figure out where to begin. I've been thinking about those girls, she said finally. The Kovach twins. Ben's expression shifted, became more guarded. That was a hard time. Still is for some. Their mother, May, she still lives here. On Elm Street, same house they were in before. Never moved, never remarried. Some people can't get past a thing like that, I guess. And the father, Raymond, he moved away maybe a year after it happened. Couldn't take it anymore, people said. The marriage fell apart right quick. Can't imagine what that does to two people, losing their kids that way. Maris nodded, thinking of the collapse of her own marriage. Did he have family here? Raymond? Ben refilled her cup, unhurried. He had a brother, Vincent, a few years older. They weren't close from what I gathered. Vincent was always a bit of an odd one. Lived up in the hills somewhere. Kept to himself. Vincent Kovach, Maris said, the pieces clicking into place. VK. Why the sudden interest? Just thinking is all. When you get old and live alone, your mind wanders. Ben watched her with the eyes of a man who had seen 74 years of human nature. Your mind doesn't wander, Maris. It's one of the sharpest I know. If you're asking about this, there's a reason. She met his gaze, weighing how much to say. Maybe, but I'm not ready to talk about it yet. I need to understand a few things first. All right, but you be careful. That whole situation, it left a lot of people with wounds that never healed right. Poking at them could make things worse. I know. Tell me about Vincent. Ben settled onto a stool, the wood groaning under his weight. Vincent. He would have been about 50 when the girls disappeared, so he'd be 53 or so now. Never married. No kids of his own. Did odd jobs around town when he needed money. Handyman stuff, mostly. Repairs, a little construction. He was skilled with his hands, knew carpentry and mechanics. But he was strange in his way. Didn't talk much. Sometimes he'd just stare at you, not saying a word. Did he know the girls? I suppose so, being their uncle. But I never saw them together. From what I heard, Raymond and Vincent didn't get on. Some old family thing, a dispute over land or something. But that could just be gossip. Where did Vincent live? Somewhere out in the national forest, I think. He'd come to town every few weeks for supplies. but I don't reckon anyone knew his exact location. Was he questioned when the girls went missing? Of course. Sheriff talked to him for hours, and he had an alibi. Said he was working on a cabin he was building way out past Miller's Ridge. Sheriff went and checked. Found the half-built cabin, just like Vincent said. There was no evidence tying him to the disappearance. Maris drank her coffee, thinking that an alibi could be manufactured, especially if you knew the area well. Is he still around? Haven't seen him in a couple of years. Could be he moved on, or could be he's just staying farther from town. People like that sometimes get more reclusive as they age. Who was the sheriff on the case? Marcus Briggs. He ran the investigation, coordinated all the search efforts, did everything he could, far as I could see. But he resigned about 6 months after the search was called off. Said he was taking an early retirement, but people figured it was because the case broke him. He took it real hard when they didn't find those girls. Where is he now? Got a place out near the highway, about 20 miles from here. Lives alone, keeps to himself. I see him now and then. He comes in for groceries. Drinks a bit too much, I think. But that's his business. Maris filed it all away, building a picture in her mind. The newspaper coverage from when it happened. You still have those papers? Probably got 'em in the back room somewhere. I keep a few years' worth. Give me a minute. Ben disappeared through a door behind the counter. Maris could hear him shifting boxes and muttering to himself. She looked around the store, the same products in the same layout they'd been in for decades. There was a comfort in that consistency, even if it was also a sign of stagnation. Ben returned with a cardboard box, newspapers stacked neatly inside. 3 months of coverage, everything from the day they went missing to when they officially called off the search. You can look through them here if you want. Just bring them back when you're done. Thanks, Ben. Maris, whatever it is you're digging into, be careful. If Vincent is involved somehow and you start poking around, that could be dangerous. And if he's not, and you're wrong, you could hurt people for no good reason. I know. I'm being careful. Are you? Because careful would be taking whatever you found to the sheriff's department and letting them handle it. She didn't answer. She just picked up the first newspaper from the box and started to read. Ben sighed, but didn't press her. He went back to his own paper, and they sat in companionable silence as Maris read. The front page from July 16th showed a photo of the girls, Lily and Emma. Identical twins with blonde hair and beaming, arm-in-arm smiles. The headline read, "Twins Missing in National Forest." The article laid out the basic facts. Camping with their father, vanished when he went to move the car. An immediate search launched. Subsequent issues tracked the search's progress. Hundreds of volunteers, helicopters with thermal imaging, K9 units, the girl's mother making tearful pleas, Raymond beside her, looking devastated. And through it all, quotes from Sheriff Briggs, vowing they would find the girls. They wouldn't give up. Every resource was being deployed. But as the weeks turned into a month, the coverage shifted in tone. Hope gave way to grim determination, then to mournful resignation. By September, the articles were about memorial services and grief counseling, about a community trying to move on while carrying an unspeakable loss. Maris found an article that mentioned Vincent specifically. It was brief, just a note that he had been questioned as part of the routine investigation of all family members and cleared of any involvement. No details about the alibi, no direct quotes, just a single paragraph tucked inside a longer piece about investigative procedure. She also found a photograph from the original search, a wide shot of volunteers gathering at a staging area. She studied the faces carefully, looking for Vincent. It took several minutes, but she found him, standing at the very edge of the group, his body angled partly away from the camera. A tall, lean figure in a baseball cap, pulled down low. Something about his posture felt wrong, though she couldn't say precisely why. Everyone else was turned inward, focused on the organizers giving instructions. Vincent was looking away, out toward the forest. Toward what? She realized with a shiver that this was it, the key she needed. She pointed to the photograph in the open album. "Ben," she asked, her voice low, "may I borrow this? I'll bring it back." "Take whatever you need," he said, his eyes serious. "Just remember what I told you. Be careful." Maris carefully tore the page with the photograph from the album, folded it, and slipped it into her coat pocket alongside the diary page she'd found. She was building a file, gathering physical proof that might eventually have to be shown to someone official. But not yet. Not until she understood more. "One more question," she said. "Do you know where I might find Raymond, the father?" Ben frowned. "Last I heard, he moved to Portland, maybe Seattle, somewhere up the coast. Why?" "Just covering my bases," Maris said. He leaned forward slightly. "Whatever you're doing, Maris, think hard about whether you really want to walk down that road. Some truths don't help anyone." "Some truths," she countered softly, "are the only thing that can." She finished her coffee, thanked Ben for his help, and walked back to her van. The photograph felt heavy in her pocket, a weight that had nothing to do with its mass. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, watching the quiet street, an ordinary town moving through its ordinary day. Somewhere in all of this was the answer to what happened to Lily and Emma Kovach. Somewhere, Vincent was either guilty or innocent, and Marcus Briggs either knew more than he was saying or was exactly what he appeared to be, a good man broken by an impossible case. Maris started the engine and drove home. The next day, she would begin the search for Vincent's cabin, the one he'd been building 3 years ago, the one that served as his alibi. She had a feeling that if she found that cabin, she might find more than just answers about where he had been. She might find answers about where the girls had been, too. Miller's Ridge was rugged country, unforgiving even by mountain standards. The ridgeline stretched north to south for about 8 miles, with steep escarpments on its eastern face and slightly more gradual approaches from the west. It was remote enough that most hikers avoided it, and the few trails that crossed it were poorly maintained and difficult to follow. If Vincent wanted privacy, this was the place to find it. Maris studied the hand-drawn map, trying to narrow down where someone might build a cabin in such terrain. It would require a relatively flat plot of land, access to water, timber for building, and ideally, a southern exposure for warmth and light. She marked 3 possible locations on her map and began the long hike. The first site was a washout, literally. A seasonal creek had flooded at some point, stripping away the topsoil and leaving behind nothing but rock and debris. No one would build here. The second location looked promising, a small bench of flat land with good trees and a spring. But when she searched it carefully, she found no sign of human activity. It took her 4 hours to reach the third site, a steady climb through dense forest, over 2 smaller ridges, and finally down into a hidden bowl on the eastern side of Miller's Ridge. And there it was. A cabin tucked among the trees, built of local timber and showing skilled craftsmanship. It was a simple structure, perhaps 20 feet by 15, with a steep pitched roof to shed the snow, a stone chimney, and windows placed to catch the sun. The cabin looked finished, or close to it, the siding weathered and the door fitting snugly on its hinges. Maris approached with caution, listening for any sign that someone was home. The place felt empty, possessed of that particular silence that settles over a building left unoccupied for some time. Still, she was careful. She circled the cabin first, taking in the surroundings, looking for anything that might tell her who had lived here and when they were last present. The area around the cabin had been cleared just enough to mitigate fire risk, with underbrush cut back and deadfall removed. A woodshed stood to one side, partially filled with split logs. A fire pit sat out front, the stones arranged in a neat circle. Everything suggested someone who knew what they were doing, who understood how to live sustainably in a place like this. She found the carved birds almost immediately. Small wooden figures hung from branches around the perimeter, perhaps a dozen of them. Each was different, but clearly made by the same hand. They were mostly songbirds, though she spotted a woodpecker and what might have been a waxwing. The carving was detailed, showing real skill and patience. These weren't crude whittling projects. This was art. Maris remembered the initials carved into the tree near the lean-to. V.K. Vincent Kovach. This had to be his place. The door was locked, but it was a simple lock. Maris hesitated only for a moment before using a shim to work the mechanism open. This was trespassing, possibly evidence tampering, and definitely illegal. But she had come too far to turn back now, and something told her that whatever answers existed, some of them were inside that cabin. The interior was dim, lit only by a single window on each wall. It was tidy, almost obsessively so. A cot in one corner, a small table and chair in another, shelves built into the walls holding supplies. A wood stove for heat and cooking stood against one wall, a stack of kindling beside it. Everything one would need for a basic existence. Nothing more. Maris moved carefully, trying not to disturb anything as she searched. The supplies on the shelves were telling. Canned goods, dried beans, rice, flour, sugar. Enough for 6 months if one were frugal. But a layer of dust coated some of the cans, and when she checked the dates, she found they had expired a year ago. No one had restocked this pantry recently. On the table lay a calendar from 2 years prior, with several days marked in pencil. She studied the markings, trying to find a pattern. Some days had X's, others had check marks. A few had small, illegible notes. It looked like someone was tracking something. Trips to town, perhaps, or work schedules, or something else entirely. She found clothes hanging on pegs, worn, practical men's clothing. Work boots by the door, a heavy coat, gloves. In a small footlocker at the end of the cot, she found more personal items, photographs, letters, a few books. She examined the photographs carefully. One showed 2 young boys, maybe 8 and 10, standing in front of an old farmhouse. Brothers, clearly. They had the same features, the same stance. The older boy had a protective hand on the younger one's shoulder. She turned it over and found an inscription on the back. Vincent and Raymond, 1981. Another photo showed the same 2 boys as teenagers. But the dynamic had shifted. Now they stood apart, not touching, their expressions guarded. Something had happened between childhood and adolescence, a rift reflected in their body language. The most recent photograph showed an adult Raymond with his wife and the twin girls. They looked happy. The girls must have been 10 in the picture, their smiles genuine. But Vincent was not in the photo. He had either been the one taking it, been cut out, or was never included at all. Maris also found letters in the trunk, most of them old, from a mother, judging by the Dear Vincent salutations and the maternal tone. But one letter was different, more recent, written in a man's script. She read it carefully. Vincent, I know we haven't spoken in years, and I know you blame me for what happened with the farm, but I need your help. Suzanne is threatening to take the girls and move to California. She's talking divorce, custody. I can't let her take my daughters. I know you know these mountains better than anyone. I know you could help if you wanted to. They're family, Vincent. Your nieces. Please think about it. Raymond. The letter was dated July 10th, 5 days before the girls disappeared. Maris read it again, her hands trembling slightly. This changed everything. Raymond had contacted Vincent right before the disappearance. He had talked about losing his daughters, about a custody dispute. And 5 days later, the girls vanished while camping with him. She searched more frantically now, looking for any other correspondence, any reply from Vincent. She found it tucked between the pages of a book, a single, brief, handwritten note on a scrap of paper. Trust me. It was undated, but the implication was clear. Vincent had agreed to help. But help with what? Had Raymond asked him to take the girls, to hide them? Was this a planned disappearance? A custody battle that had spiraled into something far worse? Maris sank onto the cabin's single chair, trying to process what she'd found. If Raymond and Vincent had conspired together, it meant the entire story of the camping trip was a lie. The weeping father on the news, the desperate searches, the grieving family. It was all a performance, a charade to cover up what Raymond had asked his brother to do. But why keep the girls hidden for so long? Why not return them after a few weeks, claiming they'd gotten lost and been found? Unless something had gone wrong, unless the plan had failed. She thought of the campsites she'd found, the evidence of the girls being moved from place to place. Vincent had been living rough, keeping them hidden while the entire town searched. Then, eventually, something changed. The camps were abandoned, supplies left behind. Where had Vincent taken them after that? Or had he taken them anywhere at all? Maris searched the cabin again, more minutely this time, looking for any clue as to what happened after those weeks in the woods. She found a map, much like her own, hand-drawn and detailed, with several locations marked. She recognized the McCready cabin, the clearing with the lean-to, and the campsite in the ravine, all marked with small X's and letters. Vincent had been logging his movements, documenting where he was keeping the girls. But the map showed one more location, farther north, marked with a large question mark, and the annotation, Last Resort. She studied the landmarks, trying to place it on her mental map of the territory. It appeared to be near the old Greenwood mine, an abandoned copper operation from the 1920s. The mine had been sealed for decades, its tunnels deemed too dangerous to enter. A mine would be the perfect place to hide someone for a long time, sheltered from the elements, impossible to search completely, remote and forgotten. But it would also be a terrible place. Dark, damp, dangerous. No place for two young girls, unless those girls were no longer alive. The thought made her feel sick, but she had to consider it. If something had happened to Lily and Emma, if they had died while in Vincent's care, A mine would be a logical place to hide their bodies, deep enough that they would never be found, safe from animals, undisturbed by human activity. Maris carefully photographed the map and the letters with her phone, making sure to capture every detail. Then she put everything back exactly as she had found it, pulled the door shut behind her, and began the long hike toward the Greenwood mine. The afternoon was fading, and she knew she wouldn't reach the mine before dark, but she needed to at least locate it, to confirm it was where she thought it was. The next day, she could return with proper light and equipment. As she walked, her mind kept returning to Raymond's letter. I can't let her take my daughters. The desperation in those words, and the selfishness. He clearly loved his daughters, but with a possessive love that couldn't countenance loss. So he conspired with his estranged brother to make them disappear, to punish his wife, to maintain control. And two 12-year-old girls had paid the price for their father's twisted love and their uncle's misguided loyalty. The sun was setting when Maris finally spotted the entrance to the old mine, a dark gash in a rock-strewn hillside, surrounded by rusting equipment and faded warning signs. She would come back in the morning with her headlamp and rope, prepared for whatever she might find in those tunnels. But tonight, she would go home and reckon with what she had discovered. The story was becoming clearer, the pieces fitting together into something tragic and terrible. She just had to follow it to the end, wherever that led. Maris returned to Fruchtsuos, to the Greenwood mine at dawn, carrying a pack with everything she might need: rope, a powerful headlamp with spare batteries, a first aid kit, water, protein bars, and her knife. She'd also brought a whistle and had told Ben that she'd be in touch by late afternoon. It wasn't much of a safety net, but it was better than nothing. The mouth of the mine gaped before her, a roughly rectangular opening about 7 feet high and 5 feet wide, shored up by old timbers that had darkened with age but still looked solid. Warning signs nailed around the entrance declared it unsafe, unstable, and forbidden. She ignored them and switched on her headlamp. The beam cut a bright circle into the absolute darkness. The tunnel ran straight for about 30 feet before branching. The air was cool and damp, smelling of earth, stone, and something metallic, like old blood. Her light caught the glint of water weeping down the walls, and she could hear the echo of drips from somewhere deeper within. The ground was uneven, a treacherous carpet of stone and debris that had crumbled from the ceiling over decades of neglect. She moved with deliberate care, testing the ground before committing her weight, ever watchful for a loose rock or a hidden pit. The tunnel forked several times, creating a labyrinth of passages where it would be all too easy to become lost. She marked her way with chalk, drawing stark white arrows on the damp rock to guide her return. The first few offshoots revealed nothing: empty passages, some caved in, others simply ending at a rock face where the ore had run dry or the work had been abandoned. But the fourth fork, narrower and less obvious than the others, showed signs of recent use. Here the floor had been cleared of loose stones, creating a smoother path, and there, carved into the wall at shoulder height, she found another small wooden bird, Vincent's mark. He had been here. Maris followed the tunnel deeper, her light throwing strange, dancing shadows against the rough-hewn walls. The passage tightened further, forcing her to stoop in places where the ceiling had sagged. By now she was 100 meters inside the mountain, farther underground than she had ever wanted to be. The sheer weight of the rock above her felt oppressive, making her breath come in short, sharp bursts. The tunnel opened into a small chamber, perhaps 4 or 5 meters across, with a higher ceiling where miners had once chased a rich vein of ore. And there, in the corner, she found it. Evidence of a prolonged stay. Someone had built a crude shelter from tarps and scavenged wood, a flimsy barrier against the tunnel's persistent drafts. A camping lantern sat on a flat rock, its battery long dead. Empty food wrappers were stacked neatly against a wall, dozens of them, suggesting weeks, if not months, of supplies. And most damningly, 2 rolled-up sleeping bags lay beside the shelter. They were child-sized. Maris's throat constricted. The girls had been here. Vincent had brought them to this cold, dark hole in the mountain and kept them here while the whole world searched for them on the surface. She tried to imagine what it must have been like for them. The fear, the suffocating blackness when the lantern died, the cold that seeped into their bones, the absolute isolation. She swept the chamber methodically, documenting everything with her camera. Behind the shelter, she found more carved wooden pegs hammered into cracks in the rock. Vincent's way of marking time. She counted them. 73 pegs. 73 days. More than 2 months. The girls had been in this mine for over 2 months. Then she found the diary pages, tucked into a crevice and protected from the damp by a plastic bag. She pulled them out, her hands trembling in the beam of her headlamp. The entries were sporadic, sometimes days apart. They chronicled a descent into despair. The first entries were confused, yet still laced with hope. Uncle Vincent says we have to stay here, he says. Dad will come get us soon. It's cold and dark, but we have food. Ima and I stay together all the time. Later, the entries grew darker. It's been so long. Why isn't Dad coming? Uncle Vincent won't answer our questions anymore. He just brings food and leaves. We're so scared. What did we do wrong? And then, the final, heartbreaking entry. Ima is sick. She coughs all the time and her forehead is hot. I told Uncle Vincent, but he just said she'll be okay. I don't think she's okay. I don't think I'm okay either. I want Mom. I want to go home. I don't understand why they're doing this to us. That was the last entry. It was undated, but based on the count of the pegs, it must have been written in late September, nearly 2.5 months after they disappeared. Maris sank onto the cold stone floor, the brittle pages in her hands, fighting to hold back tears. These girls had suffered so much, endured so much fear, confusion, and pain. And for what? Because their father couldn't stand to lose a custody battle? Because Vincent was convinced he was helping? She looked around the chamber again, searching for a clue as to what happened next. The shelter was abandoned, supplies left behind. If the girls had gotten sick down here, pneumonia perhaps, or hypothermia, or any of a dozen things that could kill you in these conditions, where were their bodies? She widened her search, checking the other tunnels that branched off from the chamber. Most were short, dead ends, but one continued deeper into the mountain. She followed it reluctantly, not wanting to go further, but unable to stop now. 15 meters in, the tunnel widened into another chamber, smaller than the first. And there she found what she had been dreading: a grave. Someone had piled stones into a cairn, carefully arranged and just the right size for the body of a child. A single wooden bird sat on top, a robin carved with exceptional care. Maris's knees gave out. She sat down heavily, staring at the cairn. One grave. Only one. It made no sense. There were two girls. If something had happened to them, where was the other grave? Vincent had buried only one. The other one had. She couldn't finish the thought. It was too terrible. But she forced herself to think logically. One grave meant one death, which meant one survivor. But if one of the twins had survived, where was she? Maris searched the rest of the mine exhaustively, checking every passage, every chamber. She found nothing else. No second grave, no other campsite, no further evidence. Just that single, lonely cairn and the abandoned shelter with its heart-wrenching diary entries. She sat in the main chamber for a long time, trying to piece together what must have happened. The timeline was clear enough. Vincent had kept the girls here for over 2 months, likely moving them from the outdoor camps as the autumn weather made life on the surface too difficult. Down here, they would be safe from the snow and freezing temperatures, but they would have been exposed to the damp, the cold, and the darkness. One of them had gotten sick. Emma, according to the diary, and she had died here in this dark hole, far from her mother, surrounded only by fear and confusion, and an uncle who claimed he was protecting her. But what about Lily? What happened to the surviving twin? Maris photographed everything: the shelter, the supplies, the cairn, the diary pages. She took dozens of pictures, making sure to capture every detail that might prove important later. Then, she carefully made her way back to the entrance, following her chalk marks, her breathing growing easier with every step that brought her closer to daylight. When she finally emerged into the late afternoon sun, she stood for several minutes, just breathing fresh air and feeling its warmth on her face. The mine had felt like a tomb, and in many ways, it was. At least one of the Kovach girls had died in there, a victim of the cold and the terrible choices the adults in her life had made. But one of them might still be alive. One of them might still be out there somewhere, living under a different name, believing her mother had abandoned her, carrying a trauma that would never fully heal. She had to find Marcus Briggs. The ex-sheriff had run the investigation, had questioned Vincent, had supposedly cleared him. But something about it was wrong. Vincent's alibi was the cabin he was building, and Briggs had checked it, confirming Vincent was where he said he was. But that didn't mean Vincent wasn't involved. It just meant he had a plausible explanation for his whereabouts. Did Briggs know? Had he found evidence and hidden it? Or had he simply not dug deep enough, not asked the hard questions? Tomorrow, she would find Briggs at his house, out past the interstate. She would confront him with what she'd discovered and demand the truth. Because somewhere, in the middle of all this, was a surviving girl. A girl who deserved to know what happened to her sister. A girl who deserved to be returned to her mother. A girl who deserved, at the very least, a chance to heal. Maris began the long walk back to her cabin, the weight of her discovery settling on her shoulders. She had come here 30 years ago to run from her own pain, to hide from a world that had taken her son and left her broken. She had built walls around herself and called it survival, but those walls were gone now, torn down by a small blue jacket, a diary page, and the ghost of 2 little girls who never got the chance to grow up. She couldn't hide anymore. She couldn't pretend this wasn't her responsibility. She was going to find out what happened to Lily Kovach, and she was going to make sure someone paid for what had been done to those children. Marcus Briggs lived in a simple trailer on a barren plot of land miles off the interstate. The property was enclosed by a chain-link fence, with no landscaping to speak of, just dirt, weeds, and a rusted-out truck propped up on blocks. It looked like the home of someone who had given up on appearances, perhaps given up on a great many things. Maris parked her truck outside the fence and sat for a moment, steeling herself. This conversation could go badly. Briggs might be dangerous if he was covering something up, or he might be broken and defensive. Either way, she had to tread carefully. She walked to the gate and rattled it. No answer. She rattled it harder, shaking the metal frame. Finally, she heard a stirring inside, and the door creaked open, revealing a man who looked decades older than his years. Briggs was maybe in his 60s, but he could have passed for 75. His face was a roadmap of deep lines, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands trembled slightly as he leaned on the doorframe. "What do you want?" His voice was a gravelly, hostile rasp. "My name is Maris Gannett. I need to talk to you about the Kovach girls." Something flickered across his face. Fear, guilt, anger, a toxic mix. "I got nothing to say about that. Case is closed." "You closed it. Get off my property." "I found Vincent's cabin. I found the camps where he kept them. I found the mine." Briggs went very still. The color drained from his face. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I found Emma's grave." He sagged against the doorframe, the fight gone out of him. For a long moment, he just stood there, and Maris thought he might collapse. Then he straightened slightly and stepped back. "Get in, but don't expect me to be sorry for anything." The inside of the trailer matched the outside. Neglected, depressing, smelling of stale alcohol and unwashed dishes. Briggs went to the small kitchen and pulled a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet. He poured himself a glass, didn't offer her any, and downed half of it in one swallow. "What do you know?" he finally asked. "I know Raymond contacted Vincent before the girls disappeared. I know Vincent agreed to help. I know they kept those girls hidden for months while everyone was out searching. I know Emma died in that mine. What I don't know," she said, her voice level, "is what you did when you found out." Briggs let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "What I did? That's the hell of a question." He drank more whiskey and sat down heavily on a worn-out sofa. "At first I did my job, ran the investigation by the book, interviewed everyone, followed every lead, coordinated the search. And I cleared Vincent because his alibi held up. He was where he said he was, working on that cabin. But you went back later." "Yeah," he sighed. "Yeah, I went back. About 3 months later, I started thinking more about it. The timing of Raymond trading in the car. The fact that he'd left the girls alone for so long. The way Vincent was working on that cabin, way out in the middle of nowhere, right when the girls vanished. It didn't add up." "So you looked into it?" "I went out to Vincent's cabin and found him there, drunk and falling apart. He wouldn't talk at first, but I pushed him. I told him I knew something was wrong, that I'd keep digging until I found out. And he broke. He told me everything." Briggs poured more whiskey, his hands shaking even more now. Raymond had asked him to take the girls to hide them for a while. The custody battle was real. Susan really was threatening to move to California with them. Raymond couldn't stand the thought of losing his daughters, so he cooked up this insane plan. He'd take them camping, make them disappear, have Vincent hide them while everyone assumed they'd died. After some time passed, after Susan had grieved and maybe moved on, Raymond would quietly get them back. They'd turn up somewhere else, claim amnesia or trauma, whatever story would stick. That's madness. It was madness, but Raymond convinced Vincent it was necessary, that it was about protecting the family. And Vincent? He wasn't right in the head. Never was. He worshipped his younger brothers, despite everything that had happened between them. So he agreed. And then it all went wrong. Briggs nodded, staring into his glass. Vincent took the girls from the campsite while Raymond was gone. He'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. He took them to those camps you found, kept them hidden, told them it was temporary. But Raymond got spooked. The search was too big, the media attention too intense. He didn't know how to end it without exposing himself. So he simply left the girls with Vincent, for months and months. And Vincent, he just kept thinking Raymond would be back for them any day. But then autumn came, and the weather turned. Raymond still hadn't appeared, so Vincent took them to the mine, thinking he was protecting them from the cold. But it was too damp, too dark. They got sick. Emma died. Emma died. Briggs's voice rasped. And when she did, Vincent finally tried to contact Raymond. He drove to the nearest payphone. He called him, told him what had happened. And do you know what Raymond said? Marissa waited, her stomach churning. He said to bury her and keep Lily hidden. He said it was too late now, that if the truth came out, he'd go to prison. He said to wait a few more months, and then he'd figure something out. My God, Vincent. He just collapsed after that. He buried Emma in the mine, and then he couldn't stand being there anymore. He took Lily, moved her to another location. I found them in a hunting cabin about 15 miles from here. Vincent was there with Lily, and she was in a bad way, malnourished, traumatized, barely speaking. I tried to take her, to end it right there. But Vincent pulled a gun. He said he'd rather die than let me take her, that he'd promised to protect her, and he wouldn't break that promise. Briggs stood, pacing, the words spilling out faster now. We struggled. The gun went off. Vincent died instantly, a clean shot to the heart. It was self-defense, clear as day, but Lily saw the whole thing. She saw me kill her uncle. What did you do with her? I sat with her for hours, trying to explain, trying to help her understand. She was so shattered, just completely broken by what had been done to her. And while I was sitting there, Raymond showed up. He came to the cabin. Vincent had told him where they were in that phone call. Raymond had been debating whether to come, whether to try and fix things or just let it all disappear. But when Vincent didn't answer his next calls, Raymond got worried and drove out. Briggs sank back onto the chair, drained. Raymond walked in, saw Vincent dead, saw Lily traumatized, saw me with my service weapon still in my hand. And he begged me. He got on his knees and he begged me not to report it. He said Susan couldn't handle the truth, that knowing what her husband had done would destroy her. He said it would be better for Lily not to be dragged through an investigation and a media circus. He promised he would make sure she got care, a new life, a chance to recover far away from all of this. And you agreed? I agreed. God help me, I agreed. We buried Vincent next to his brother's property. We told people he'd moved away. Raymond took Lily to a private facility out of state, got her therapy, gave her a new identity. He pays for everything, takes care of her from a distance. She's alive, Marissa. She's 15 now, living with a foster family, going to school. She's slowly healing, and all the while her mother thinks she's dead. Briggs's face was a mask of torment. Susan. My God, Susan. That woman has suffered more than anyone should ever have to. But Raymond convinced me it was for the best, that telling her the truth would only add to her pain, make her relive it all, that Lily needed a clean slate, a new beginning. That wasn't your decision to make. I know. I know that now. I knew it then, really. But I let Raymond talk me into it. I was tired, I was overwhelmed, and I wanted to believe there was a way to end this without more pain. So I helped him cover it up. I buried evidence, I falsified reports, I lied to everyone, and I've lived with it every single day since. You have to tell her, Marissa said. Susan deserves to know her daughter is alive. If I tell her now, after 3 years, what happens? I go to prison for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, probably accessory after the fact. Raymond goes to prison for kidnapping and contributing to the death of Emma. Susan finds out her husband destroyed her family and that her daughter thinks she abandoned her. Lily's life gets turned upside down all over again. Who does that help? It helps the truth. The truth, Briggs said bitterly. The truth is poison. It doesn't heal anything. It just spreads the damage around. Marissa stood, looking down at this broken man who had made terrible decisions for what he thought were good reasons. You're wrong. The truth is the only thing that can heal. It might hurt. It might be terrible, but it's real. And these people deserve what's real. They deserve to know what happened and decide for themselves how to move forward. So what are you going to do? Turn me in? Blow the whole thing open? I'm going to find Lily. I'm going to tell Susan her daughter is alive. And then I'm going to let them decide what happens next. Not you, not Raymond, them. She's at a facility in Oregon, the White River Group home just outside of Portland. She goes by the name Sarah Morgan now. And Raymond? Seattle. He works construction under his real name. Sends money every month to take care of Lily. Never visits, never calls. The coward can't even face what he's done. Marissa turned to leave, but stopped. Why did you tell me all this? You could have just denied everything. Briggs looked up at her, his eyes hollow. Because I'm tired. I've been carrying this for 3 years and it's killing me. Part of me hopes you do expose it all. At least then it would be over. It will be over, Marissa said, one way or another. She left the trailer and sat in her truck for a long time, the pieces of the story falling into place with sickening clarity. It was so much worse than she had imagined. Not just a kidnapping, but a conspiracy between a father and his brother. Not just a death, but a cover-up involving a sheriff. Not just 2 missing girls, but 1 dead and 1 living a lie. And somewhere in Oregon, Lily Kovach, now Sarah Morgan, was living her life, having no idea that her mother still wept for her, still loved her, still kept her bedroom exactly as it was 3 years ago. Marissa started the truck and drove home. She had decisions to make, plans to form. But one thing was certain. This secret had festered in the dark for far too long. It was time to bring it into the light, no matter how much that light would burn. That night, Marissa laid everything out. The jacket, the diary pages, the photographs from Vincent's cabin, the pictures of the mine and the campsites, the notes from her conversation with Briggs. She spread them across her table and studied them like pieces of a puzzle, making sure she understood the whole story before she tried to tell it to anyone else. The evidence told a clear narrative, but it was the kind of story that would shatter lives even as it answered questions. Susan would learn her daughter was alive, an immeasurable gift. But she would also learn that her husband had orchestrated the kidnapping, that her other daughter had died because of his choices, that 3 years of grieving could have been avoided if people had just told the truth. How do you deliver news like that? How do you prepare someone for information that would change everything they thought they knew about their life? Marissa didn't sleep much. She kept thinking of Susan Kovach, a woman she'd never met but felt bound to by the shared experience of loss. Susan was living in a special kind of hell, the hell of not knowing. When Marissa's own son had died, at least she knew. She could bury him, mourn him properly, and eventually find some kind of peace with the terrible finality of it. Susan had been denied even that small mercy. By morning, her decision was made. She would go to Susan first. She would tell her everything and show her the proof. Susan deserved to hear it from someone who understood loss, not from the police or the media or anyone with an agenda. Then, together, if Susan wanted, they would contact the authorities and figure out how to bring Lily home. But first, she had one more stop to make. She had to see Ben. The drive to Birch Hollow felt longer than usual. Marissa kept rehearsing what she would say, how she would explain what she'd found. Ben deserved to know too. He'd looked out for Susan for years, checking in on her, worrying about her. He would be relieved to know one of the girls had survived, but he would be furious about the cover-up. The general store was just opening when she arrived. Ben looked surprised to see her again so soon. "Marissa, what's going on? You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't. Not much. Ben, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm done." His expression turned serious. "All right." She told him everything. The jacket, the diary pages, Vincent's cabin, the shallow grave, Briggs's confession, Raymond's conspiracy, Lily's survival. She watched his expression shift as the story unfolded. Shock, anger, disbelief, sorrow, all passing over his weathered face. When she finished, he sat down heavily on a stool. "My God," he whispered, "that poor woman. 3 years she's been living with this, and her girl was alive the whole time. I'm going to tell her today. I wanted you to know first." "Does she have anyone? Susan? I mean, family, close friends?" "I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me." Ben thought for a moment. "Her sister lives in Portland. I think they talk on the phone sometimes. And there's a woman from her church who stops by. Patricia something. Can't remember her last name. But honestly, Marissa, Susan's been pretty isolated. She stopped seeing most people after the first year. I think it was too hard facing their pity. Will you come with me when I tell her?" Ben looked at her with something like respect. "You're not going to do that alone. She shouldn't be alone when she hears it. And I'm not sure I'm the right person to help her handle what comes next. You know her better than I do. Give me a few minutes to lock up." They drove to Elm Street in Marissa's truck, not saying much. The neighborhood was old, the houses small and neat, the kind of place where lives were lived quietly. Susan's house was a pale yellow bungalow with a small porch and window boxes, though the flowers in them were clearly neglected. Marissa knocked on the door, her heart pounding. They waited. She was about to knock again when the door opened. Susan Kovach was maybe 45, but she looked older. Grief ages you faster than time. She was thin, her hair starting to gray, her face drawn, but her eyes were still sharp, still watchful, and they grew instantly wary at the sight of strangers on her doorstep. "Mrs. Kovach, my name is Marissa Gannett. This is Ben Halford. Could we speak with you for a few minutes?" "I know Ben," Susan said slowly. "You're the woman who lives up in the mountains." "I am. I have something important to tell you. Something about your daughters. May we come in?" Susan's hand went to her throat, an instinctive gesture to ward off more pain. What is it? Did you find them? We did. Please, just let us come inside and I'll explain everything. Susan stepped back, allowing them into a living room that felt frozen in time. The girls' school pictures hung on the walls. Their backpacks were still by the door. A pair of tiny shoes was visible down the hall. It was a shrine, carefully maintained, a mother's way of keeping her daughters alive in the only way she could. They sat Susan on the sofa, with Marissa and Ben in chairs across from her. Marissa set her bag on the floor. The proof inside it felt heavier than it should. Mrs. Kovach, Marissa began, her voice steady. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult. But I want you to know one thing first. Lily is alive. The words hung in the still air. Susan didn't move, didn't react. She just stared at Marissa as if the words were in a foreign language she couldn't translate. Then, a sound escaped her, a sound Marissa had never heard before. It was raw, primal, a gasp of hope and anguish and disbelief all tangled together. Ben quickly moved to sit beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders as she began to tremble. How? Susan finally managed to say. How is that possible? Where has she been? Why didn't anyone tell me? Marissa began to explain, starting with the discovery of the jacket and moving through everything she had found. She kept her voice even and objective, trying to deliver the facts without overwhelming her. But there was no gentle way to reveal that a husband had plotted to kidnap his own children, that one of them had died as a result, that people you trusted had lied to you for years. Susan listened, tears streaming down her face, occasionally interrupting with questions or choked cries of disbelief. When Marissa got to Emma's death, Susan made that sound again, a pain so deep it had no adequate expression in words. Emma, she whispered, my baby. She died alone in the dark. I'm so sorry, Marissa said, her own eyes burning. I am so sorry for all of it. Raymond did this, Susan said, the words a statement of dawning horror. My husband did this to our girls. Yes. Susan shot to her feet, pacing the small room, her hands moving restlessly. 3 years. For 3 years, I've been mourning them both. And one of them was alive. For 3 years, Lily was without me. I wonder what she thinks, what she knows about me, if she even remembers. I don't know exactly what she was told, Maris admitted. Briggs said Raymond gave her a new identity, put her in therapy, tried to help her heal, but I don't have the details. I want to see her, right now. We have to go get her. We will, Ben said gently. But we need to do this the right way. We have to contact the authorities, make sure Lily is safe, and prepare her for Toon. Prepare her. She's my daughter. She should be here with me. You're right, Maris said. She should be. But she has been through a terrible trauma and has been living under a different name for 3 years. We need to make sure we don't hurt her even more by rushing in. Susan sank back onto the sofa, the fight draining out of her. You're right. I know you're right. I can't believe this is real. I've dreamed of this so many times. Waking up to find out it was all a mistake, that they were alive. Now it is real, at least part of it. And I don't know how to handle it. We'll help you, Ben said. You're not alone in this. What do I do? What's the first step? Maris took out a cell phone. She kept one for emergencies, though she rarely used it. We call the FBI. This crosses state lines. It involves kidnapping and homicide and official corruption. They'll know how to handle it. Will I get to see Lily today? I don't know, but soon. I promise you will see her soon. Susan gazed at the photos on the walls, at the frozen smiles of her daughters from 3 years ago. She must be 15 now. She was 12. I've lost 3 years of her life. Birthdays, school, everything. Because of Raymond. Because of his selfishness. He is going to pay for what he did. So will Briggs, Maris said. Everyone who kept this secret will face the consequences. I don't care about that, Susan said, a new steel in her voice. Right now, beneath all the pain, I just want my daughter back. The next hour was a blur of phone calls. First to the FBI field office in Portland, where a bewildered agent became rapidly, intensely interested as Maris laid out the story and the evidence. Then to a victim services coordinator, and then to a lawyer Ben knew who specialized in family law and criminal defense. By the afternoon, the house was full of people. Federal agents, local police, social workers. They photographed Maris's evidence, took statements from everyone, and made plans to contact and safely retrieve Lily. It was overwhelming and exhausting, but it was also progress. The machine of justice was finally, grindingly, in motion. Susan watched it all in a daze, answering questions when asked, but mostly just existing in the space between her old reality and the new one taking shape. At one point, she turned to Maris, who was sitting quietly in a corner. Why did you do this? You didn't know us. You could have just walked away. Maris thought of Tommy, of the 30 years she'd spent hiding from the pain, of the walls she'd built that had finally come crashing down. I had a son, she said softly. I lost him when he was 8. I couldn't save him. But I could do this. I could find your daughter. Sometimes the second chance you get is for someone else. Susan crossed the room and hugged her, and Maris let herself be held, let herself feel the weight of another person's gratitude and grief. It was uncomfortable and foreign, but it was also real, more real than anything she had felt in decades. Thank you, Susan whispered. Thank you for bringing her back to me. Outside, through the window, Maris could see more cars arriving. The press would be here soon. Once the story broke, it would become a national sensation. The missing twins, the father's betrayal, the corrupt sheriff, the miraculous survival of one child. It would be chaos for a while. But amid all that chaos, somewhere in Oregon, Lily Kovach was about to find out that her mother had never stopped looking, had never stopped loving her, and was on her way to bring her home. The FBI moved swiftly once they understood the scope of what had happened. Within hours, they had confirmed that a Sarah Morgan at the White River Group home was indeed Lily Kovach. They located Raymond in Seattle and took him into custody. They brought Marcus Briggs in for questioning, and they began the delicate process of preparing Lily for the truth. Susan wanted to drive to Oregon immediately, but the agents convinced her to wait. Lily needed time to process, they explained. She had lived as Sarah Morgan for 3 years, believing her mother had chosen not to find her, building a new identity on that painful foundation. To have that foundation suddenly ripped away would be traumatic. It had to be done carefully, with therapists present, with time to prepare. So Susan waited. But she spent that time learning everything she could about her daughter's life for the past 3 years. The director of the group home, a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, spoke to Susan on the phone that evening. She was professional, but clearly shaken by the news. I need you to understand, Dr. Chen said. We were told Sarah's mother was deceased, and her father was incapacitated. We believed we were caring for an orphan who had been traumatized by the loss of both parents. If we had known the truth— I know, Susan interrupted gently. You were lied to. Everyone was, except the people who buried the truth. Has Sarah made progress there? When she arrived, she barely spoke. She had nightmares every night, anxiety attacks, trouble trusting anyone. But she's had intensive therapy, and she has improved significantly. She has friends now. She's doing well in school. She's even started to smile again, every now and then. Susan closed her eyes, tears leaking down her face. Her daughter smiled again. After everything, she had found a way to smile. Tell me about her, Susan pleaded. Please, everything. Dr. Chen described a girl who loved to read, who was good at math, who had recently joined the school's art club. She was quiet, but kind, always helping the younger children with their homework. She had a best friend named Jessica, and they were inseparable. She loved dogs and wanted to volunteer at an animal shelter when she turned 16. Susan drank in every detail, starved for information about the daughter who had been denied her for so long. This was not the 12-year-old girl she remembered. This was someone new, someone who had been shaped by trauma and survival and the terrible choices that adults had made. Does she ever talk about me? Susan asked, her voice cracking. Dr. Chen was silent for a moment. Sometimes, in therapy, she expresses anger that her mother didn't protect her. She has said she felt abandoned. These are normal reactions, considering what she believed happened. But Mrs. Kovach, I want you to know, beneath that anger, there is love. There is longing. She has a photograph of you and her sister that she keeps hidden in her room. Our staff found it once during a routine check. When we asked about it, she became very defensive, very protective of it. Whatever she says about feeling abandoned, a part of her never let you go. Susan pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. When can I see her? We're telling her the truth tomorrow morning, with her therapist present. After that, if she's willing, we'll arrange a meeting. It will be supervised at first. We need to be sure you are both emotionally prepared for this reunion. But yes, Mrs. Kovach, soon. After the call, Susan sat in the living room, surrounded by the evidence of her daughter's last day. The FBI had photographed everything, but they had left the originals, the jacket, the diary pages, the photos Maris had taken, physical proof that her girls had existed, that their disappearance had happened, that it wasn't all just a terrible dream. Ben had stayed with her most of the day, fielding calls and keeping curious neighbors at bay. Now, he made tea and brought her a cup. How are you doing? I don't know, Susan said honestly. I'm about to get one daughter back and know for certain that I've lost the other. How is anyone supposed to hold both of those things at the same time? Carefully, Ben said. And with help. You're not doing this alone. Emma's grave is in that mine. They're sending a team to recover her remains, to bring her home properly. I'll finally get to bury my daughter, after 3 years of not knowing where she was. I get to lay her to rest. That's something. It's not enough, but it's something. She looked at Ben, this kind man who had stood by her silently for years, asking nothing in return. Why did you stay? Why did you keep checking on me when everyone else gave up? Because you needed someone to remember with you, he said simply. Because your girls deserved to have people who didn't forget them. And because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need a reason beyond it being the right thing. Maris arrived later that evening, looking exhausted but determined. She had spent hours with the FBI, going over every detail of her investigation. showing them locations, explaining how she pieced it all together. They want you to go with Susan tomorrow, she told Ben. To Oregon, for the meeting. They think having familiar faces will help. Since you know the family. Of course I'll go, Ben said immediately. He turned to Susan. If you want me there. I do, Susan said, her voice thick with emotion. I definitely do. Maris sat down, stirring the tea Ben handed her. They arrested Raymond about an hour ago. He's not fighting extradition. Apparently, she said, choosing her words carefully. He broke down when they told him it was all coming out. He's been carrying this guilt for 3 years. Good, Susan said, no mercy in her voice. He can carry it for the rest of his life. He will. They're charging him with kidnapping, contributing to a death, child endangerment, and about 10 other things. Briggs is facing charges too, though they might offer him a deal if he testifies against Raymond. I don't care about deals or justice or anything else right now, Susan said. I just want to see my daughter. I want to hold her and tell her I never stopped looking, that I never stopped loving her. Everything else can wait. The three of them sat together as the late afternoon faded into evening, each lost in their own thoughts. Tomorrow, everything would change again. Tomorrow, a mother would be reunited with the daughter she had lost. Tomorrow, the long process of healing could finally begin. But for tonight, they just sat. Three people who understood loss and survival, and the strange ways that grace sometimes arrived in the midst of tragedy. The White River Group home was a sprawling, single-story building set among pine trees, designed to look more like a retreat center than an institution. Susan sat in the parking lot, unable to get out of the car. Ben sat beside her, patient and silent. Maris had stayed behind. This was a family moment, and she had no place in it. She's in there, Susan whispered. My daughter is in there. What if she doesn't want to see me? What if she hates me for not finding her sooner? 3 years is so long. So much has been broken. Maybe, Ben said gently. Or maybe she's been waiting for this moment, just as much as you have. Dr. Chen met them at the entrance, her expression professional but warm. Sarah knows you're here. We told her everything this morning. The truth about what her father did, about Emma, about the cover-up. She's processing it with her therapist now. It's been a lot for her. How did she take it? Susan asked, her heart pounding. Mostly shock, anger, confusion, but also, and this is important, relief. I think a part of her always knew something wasn't right about the story she was told. Knowing the truth, as painful as it is, seems to have lifted a weight from her. They walked through quiet hallways decorated with art made by the residents. Dr. Chen led them into a small conference room with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. A woman in her late 30s was already there. Mrs. Kovach, the woman said, standing to greet them. I'm Dr. Linda Morrison. I've been working with Sarah since she arrived 3 years ago. I want to prepare you for what you're about to see. Sarah isn't the same girl you remember. Trauma changes people, especially the young. She's taller, of course, and she's developed defense mechanisms that might seem distant or guarded. Please don't take it personally if she doesn't immediately open up to you. I understand. Also, she's asked for her friend Jessica to be present. She wants someone she trusts in the room with her. We've agreed to allow it. Susan nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. Whatever she needs. Dr. Chen left and returned a few minutes later with 2 teenage girls. Susan's breath caught in her throat. Lily. She stood in the doorway, taller and thinner than Susan remembered, her blonde hair cut short in a style that made her look older. She wore jeans and a hoodie, her arms crossed over her chest, in a defensive stance. Her face had lost its childish roundness, showing the first hints of the woman she was becoming. But her eyes. Those were still the same eyes Susan had looked into every day for 12 years. Mother and daughter stared at each other from across the room. Neither moved. The moment stretched on, fragile and immense. Lily, Susan finally said, the name fracturing as she spoke it. My name is Sarah now, the girl replied, but her voice was uncertain, trembling. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything that happened to you. They said. Sarah trailed off, swallowing hard. They said you didn't know that father has a strong. Her words were cut short as a powerful wave of pressure seized her abdomen, stealing her breath. Marcus glanced at his wristwatch. That's one. Let's time them. He worked with methodical precision, transforming a corner of the cabin into a makeshift delivery room. Clean sheets on the bed, medical instruments sterilizing in boiling water, improvised stirrups fashioned from clean rope and pillows. Every movement was efficient, with no wasted energy, no hint of panic. Sarah watched him through the rising waves of discomfort. You've really done this before? Twice in Afghanistan, once in South Sudan. He positioned lanterns to provide the best possible light for the coming night. They weren't ideal setups, but we got the job done. Another contraction hit her, harder than the last. Sarah breathed through it, calling on the techniques from her birthing classes. Marcus noted the time. 12 minutes since the last one. Still early. First babies usually take their time. He arranged pillows to support her back. Try to rest between them. Conserve your strength. And the men outside? Marcus's expression hardened for a moment. That was a secondary concern now. This cabin has stood for 40 years. It's solid construction. The entrance is defensible. His clinical assessment was strangely reassuring. Sarah nodded, then winced as another contraction began to build. 8 minutes, Marcus noted, a hint of surprise in his voice. Moving more quickly now, he went to the stove and returned with a steaming mug. Red raspberry leaf tea. It helps with labor. Sarah accepted it gratefully. You just have that lying around? It's useful for various medicinal purposes. A faint smile touched his lips. Though I'll admit, obstetric supplies weren't a top priority when I scouted this place. The next few hours passed in a blur of escalating contractions. Before Sarah's eyes, Marcus transformed. The gruff recluse was replaced by a focused, competent medic. He checked her progress regularly, his clinical detachment making the intimate examinations less awkward than they might have been. 6 centimeters, he announced. You're making good progress. By evening, the contractions were crashing over her every 3 minutes. Sarah gripped the edge of the bed, her hair matted with sweat. I don't think I can do this. You're already doing it. His voice was steady, an anchor in the storm of pain. Your body knows what to do, trust it. A sound from outside drew his attention to the window. Dusk had fallen, and with it came the sound of movement in the undergrowth, too deliberate for wildlife. They're back, Sarah whispered, her voice tight with pain and fear. Marcus moved swiftly to the window, peering cautiously into the gloom. A single watchman. He picked up his rifle, placing it close at hand, but out of sight of the windows.